13-year-old boy sang the most tender love song of his career. The subject was a rat. A songwriter handed away her biggest hit, and years later, didn't recognize her own song on the radio. And a chant that sold 6 million copies started as 2 words that would have gotten bleeped on TV. Blow, Daddy! You've heard these 10 songs 100 times. You have no idea what they're actually about. Quick thing first, hit subscribe before we start. You're going to want to see the next one of these. Good God, y'all! Number 10, Chic, Le Freak, 1978. 1, 2, Every time you hear, freak out, Le Freak, say chic, at a wedding, you are singing a cleaned-up version of a very different sentence. On New Year's Eve, 1977, Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards were personally invited to Studio 54, the most exclusive nightclub on Earth, by Grace Jones herself, who wanted to talk about producing her next record. They got to the door. Their names weren't on the list. The doormen refused to believe 2 guys in coats were actually the members of Chic, and turned them away on the biggest party night of the year. Furious, embarrassed, and stuck outside in the cold, Rodgers and Edwards went back to Edwards' apartment, opened 2 bottles of champagne, and started jamming out their frustration. The chorus that came out of that session was blunt, direct, and completely unusable on the radio. 2 words aimed squarely at that doorman. When it came time to actually record the song, Edwards wasn't comfortable putting profanity on wax. They tried softening it to freak off. That didn't sing right either. Then someone landed on freak out instead, and suddenly the whole thing clicked into place. Angry energy transformed into a full-blown dance command. Le Freak went to number 1, became the best-selling single in Atlantic Records history at the time, and is now preserved in the Library of Congress as culturally significant. The lyrics even name-check the very club that rejected them, inviting the whole world down to 54 for a party the songwriters themselves once got locked out of. Every time that chorus plays, you're hearing the polished, radio-safe version of a very angry New Year's Eve. But that's a fun accident. What happened with our next song was actually the most controversial rejection in the history of MTV, and it wasn't for the reason you'd assume. Number 9, Irma Franklin, Piece of My Heart, 1967. If you know this song at all, you probably picture one specific voice, raw, screaming, unmistakably Janis Joplin. Almost nobody pictures the woman who actually wrote it into existence a full year earlier, and whose own sister happens to be the Queen of Soul. Irma Franklin, Aretha Franklin's older sister, recorded the original Piece of My Heart in 1967. It was a modest hit, a Grammy nomination, a spot in the R&B top 10, but nowhere near the cultural explosion it would eventually become. The song had actually been offered to Van Morrison first. He turned it down, wanting to focus on his own material, and it landed with Irma instead. A year later, an up-and-coming psychedelic rock band called Big Brother and the Holding Company, fronted by a relatively unknown singer named Janis Joplin, recorded their own version. It was faster, wilder, and Joplin's voice tore through it in a completely different way than Franklin's smooth, gospel-trained delivery. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Irma Franklin later admitted that when she first heard Joplin's cover playing on the radio, she barely recognized it as her own song. Two completely different performances of the exact same lyrics, so different in delivery that the original writer's own ears couldn't connect them.
Didn't I make you feel?
Franklin was reportedly never bitter about it. She even admired what Joplin had done with it, the same way her sister Aretha had once transformed Otis Redding's Respect into something entirely her own. But history rarely remembers the second name. Joplin's version is the one played at parties. Franklin's is the one true music historians go digging for. The woman who actually created Piece of My Heart got erased by her own song's success. But our next story involves a rejection so strange, the songwriter got sent an actual Bible over it. Number 8. The Weather Girls. It's Raining Men, 1982. This song was written specifically for Donna Summer. She said no, and the reason why is stranger than you'd think. Songwriters Paul Jabara and Paul Schaefer wrote the entire thing in a single afternoon in 1979, with Summer's voice in mind the whole time. But by then, Summer had recently become a born-again Christian, and when she read the lyric, "It's Raining Men, Hallelujah," she was reportedly so offended she considered it blasphemous, and actually mailed the songwriter a Bible in response. Undeterred, Jabara took the song around to some of the biggest names in music. Diana Ross passed, Cher passed, Barbra Streisand passed. Every single one of them looked at a song about literal men falling from the sky and decided it wasn't for them. Eventually, the song landed with a duo called 2 Tons O' Fun, Martha Wash and Izora Armstead, who weren't exactly enthusiastic either. Martha Wash later admitted her first reaction was that the concept was simply too ridiculous to take seriously. They recorded it anyway, changed their group's name to the Weather Girls to match the song, and released it in 1982. It became a global phenomenon, an instant gay anthem, a permanent fixture at weddings and pride celebrations, and earned a Grammy nomination. Decades later, it's one of the most recognizable disco songs ever recorded, after being turned down by 4 of the biggest female vocalists in music history, and after nearly ending a friendship over a Bible verse. Sometimes the biggest hits are the ones every star with actual leverage was too scared to touch. But our next song has an even stranger rejection story, one that got tangled up with the very first year of MTV. Number 7, Rick James, Super Freak, 1981. Everybody assumes this song became a hit despite MTV refusing to play it because of racism. The real story is more complicated, and it doesn't involve the reason you'd expect.
She says that I'm her all-time favorite.
First, the writing itself. Rick James has said Super Freak wasn't planned as a centerpiece at all.
That girl is pretty kinky.
Every other song on his album Street Songs was already finished when he threw this one together, almost as an afterthought. A quick, silly track blending funk with a new wave edge, co-written with his friend, an LA radio DJ named Alonzo Miller. That afterthought became his signature song, the biggest hit of his career, and the song MC Hammer would later sample for You Can't Touch This. A sample so direct that James and Miller ended up officially winning a Grammy alongside Hammer for a song they never even performed on. Here's the twist almost nobody knows.
That girl is pretty kinky.
When MTV was considering whether to play the Super Freak video, the person who actually rejected it wasn't some anonymous white executive enforcing a racist policy. It was Carolyn Baker, MTV's black director of talent acquisition.
She's alright. She's alright.
In her own words, she turned it down because the video featured half-naked women, and she didn't want that representing black artists, as potentially the first black video the channel ever aired. It's a far more complicated story than the one usually told. Not a simple case of MTV shutting black artists out, but a black executive making a deliberate creative judgment call about representation, which the song's massive success then completely overshadowed. A silly afterthought song became a career-defining anthem, tangled in a rejection far more nuanced than the myth around it. But our next song was almost sung by a completely different member of the group entirely.
I really love to taste her. Every time we meet.
Number 6. Diana Ross and the Supremes. Love Child, 1968. Every time you hear Love Child, you're hearing three women's voices in perfect harmony.
What I feel for you is real love. In others' eyes I see reflected.
Except you're not. Two of those voices don't belong to who you think. By 1968, Motown wanted the Supremes to tackle something heavier than typical love songs. A songwriting team called The Clan built Love Child around the story of a young woman who resists premarital sex, terrified of the stigma faced by children born out of wedlock, and the lyrics were deliberately shaped to mirror Diana Ross's own childhood, growing up without a father in the home. Here's what almost nobody realizes. Mary Wilson and Cindy Birdsong, the other two Supremes, whose names were right there on the record label, didn't sing a single note on the actual single. Motown used a session group called the Andantes as backup vocalists instead, and released that version rather than the group's original take. Mary Wilson later said she believed Berry Gordy did this deliberately to remind her and Birdsong exactly how replaceable they were, while elevating his own protege, Diana Ross. Love Child knocked the Beatles' Hey Jude off the #1 spot, became the group's best-selling single ever, and even inspired an entire sequel song the following year about the child growing up in shame. But it also marked one of the clearest moments where the group on the label was, behind the scenes, barely a group at all anymore. A song about hidden truths turned out to be hiding one of its own. But our next entry involves a protest song so powerful, the group that recorded it first was too afraid to release it. Number 5, Edwin Starr, War, 1970. War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. One of the most recognizable protest chants in music history, and it was never supposed to be Edwin Starr's song at all.
These tears without circumcised. There's some
Motown songwriters Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong wrote War specifically for the Temptations, one of the label's biggest and most bankable acts, and the group recorded it for their 1970 album Psychedelic Shack.
ones go off and fight and lose their lives. I said,
The album cut struck a nerve immediately. Thousands of college students, deep in the anti-Vietnam protest movement, wrote letters to Motown demanding the label release it as an official single.
oh, it's my mind. War is constant arrest.
Motown said no. The label was terrified that attaching something this politically explicit to their most popular male group could alienate more conservative fans and damage the Temptations' commercial standing. Whitfield fought the decision, but the label held firm on one condition. The song could be released as a single, but only if a different artist recorded it.
It ain't nothing but a heartbreaker.
Whitfield first tried the band Rare Earth. They turned it down. Finally, it landed with Edwin Starr, a lesser-known Motown artist with far less to lose.
Good God.
Starr recorded it with everything he had, adding his now iconic ad-libs, "Good God, y'all," and "Absolutely Nothing," improvised right there in the booth. War shot straight to #1, became one of the most successful protest songs ever recorded, and is still played at demonstrations more than 50 years later.
To the Undertaker.
The Temptations, the group everyone assumes originated it, never got the credit for introducing it to the world, because their own label decided they were too valuable to risk. A song too powerful for its intended singers became a landmark instead for the artist nobody expected. But our next song has one of the strangest true subjects in music history, and it isn't even human. Number 4, Michael Jackson. Ben, 1972.
The two of us need look no more.
Michael Jackson's first ever solo #1 hit is a tender, aching love ballad. The subject of that love is a rat, a specific, literal, trained-to-kill rat from a horror movie. Ben was written as the theme song for a 1972 horror film, a sequel to the killer rat movie Willard, about a lonely, sickly boy who befriends the leader of a colony of trained, murderous rats.
Always running here and there.
In the movie itself, Ben eventually turns violent alongside the rest of his rat army, but the song plays entirely straight over the film's closing credits, sung with complete sincerity about loyalty and friendship.
If you ever look behind.
Songwriter Don Black later admitted the challenge of the assignment outright. You can't really write a love song using words like cheese or whiskers, so he leaned entirely into the theme of friendship instead.
Now it sounds.
Deliberately avoiding anything that would remind the listener what Ben actually was.
Now it's we.
11-year-old Michael Jackson recorded it with a soulful conviction that felt far beyond his years, and it became his first solo #1, going on to sell 1.7 million copies and receive an Academy Award nomination.
I don't listen to
Jackson himself later said he understood exactly why the story resonated with him. A lonely kid whose only real friend happened to be strange and misunderstood by everyone else.
what they say.
To this day, Ben remains the only love song in American chart history written from a boy's perspective, directed at a rat, that became a genuine cultural phenomenon.
We had a friend like Ben.
And most people who've sung along to it their whole lives have absolutely no idea. That's a strange true story hiding in plain sight. But our next song's true story is about a woman who almost never got to sing it at all, because of what happened to her body just months before. Number 3. Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive, 1978. The most famous anthem of resilience ever recorded almost didn't exist, not because nobody wanted it, but because the label deliberately buried it as a throwaway. In 1978, Gloria Gaynor's career was stalling. Her record contract wasn't being renewed. Her mother had recently died. And months before this song was recorded, she suffered a serious fall on stage in Europe that left her hospitalized with spinal injuries, requiring surgery and a back brace just to move around. Around that same time, producers needed a quick B-side for a Gaynor cover of an old Righteous Brothers song called Substitute. Songwriter Dino Fakaris, who had recently lost his own job at Motown after nearly 7 years, poured his own experience of unemployment and determination into the lyrics. Reportedly jumping up and down on his bed the moment he finished writing, shouting, "I will survive," to himself before Gaynor ever sang a note of it. Now I'm saving all my loving for someone who's loving me. Gaynor recorded her vocals while literally wearing a back brace from her injury, and the label still didn't believe in the song. They insisted Substitute remain the official single, with I Will Survive tucked away as a forgettable flip side. It was New York club DJs who changed everything, spinning the B-side obsessively until radio stations had no choice but to follow. Polydor eventually had to flip the single entirely. I Will Survive went to number 1 in both the US and UK, became a defining anthem for the LGBTQ community, and is now enshrined in the National Recording Registry. A song about surviving devastating setbacks was itself nearly buried by the very label that owned it, saved only by a woman who quite literally couldn't stand up straight while she recorded it. But then I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong. That story alone should give you chills. But our next entry involves a title so widely misquoted that people say the exact opposite of what it actually means, and the artist himself watched it get sold out to a sneaker company while he was fighting for his life. I just walked in to find you here with that sad look upon. Number 2, Gil Scott-Heron, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, 1970.
Charged by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew.
You have almost certainly heard this title said wrong, not slightly wrong, backwards. And the real meaning is something almost nobody who quotes it actually understands.
You by the Schaefer Award Theater and will not star Natalie Woods and Steve McQueen.
Gil Scott-Heron, a jazz poet often credited as one of the earliest forefathers of rap, wrote this spoken word piece in 1970 as a statement about internal transformation. In his own words, decades later, the first change that happens in any revolution takes place inside your own mind.
There will be no pictures of you and Willie Mae
before it ever shows up anywhere you could point a camera at. It was never a literal statement about television broadcasting.
Replay. There will be no pictures of Whitney Young being run out of Harlem on a rail with a...
It was a demand that people stop passively waiting for change to be delivered to their couch, and instead get up and become part of it themselves. Somewhere along the way, popular culture flattened all of that nuance into a slogan. The revolution will be televised, said constantly, completely inverting Scott-Heron's actual point, printed on t-shirts and shouted at protests by people who'd never heard the full piece. Here's the part that turns this story genuinely painful.
Revolution will not be televised. There will be no...
In 1994, While battling drug addiction and in serious need of money, Gil Scott-Heron licensed his own song's title to Nike, allowing rapper KRS-One to rework the lyrics into a commercial for Air Jordans, the exact kind of corporate commercialism the original piece had spent its entire runtime warning.
It will not be televised. The tiger in your tank or the giant in your toilet bowl. The revolution will not.
Scott-Heron reportedly regretted the decision for the rest of his life. A piece of art built entirely around resisting passive consumption got sold, quite literally, to sell sneakers. 50 years later, it's still one of the most quoted, and most misquoted, pieces of music in American history.
Rocks in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not.
That's a genuinely tragic irony. But our final song's true story might be the most powerful one on this entire list, because the woman who made it immortal originally hated it, for a reason that says everything about who she really was.
Show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell.
Number 1. Tina Turner, What's Love Got to Do With It? 1984.
You must understand all the time.
4 major artists turned this song down before Tina Turner ever touched it, and then Tina Turner turned it down too. Songwriters Terry Britten and Graham Lyle wrote it in the early 1980s and first offered it to British pop star Cliff Richard, who rejected it as too risky for his image. It was then passed to Donna Summer, rejected. Then soul singer Phyllis Hyman, rejected. Then the British group Bucks Fizz, rejected again. By the time it finally reached Tina Turner, she was in the middle of an unlikely comeback, years removed from her abusive marriage and professional partnership with Ike Turner.
You must try to ignore.
Performing in Vegas lounges and grinding through the wreckage of what her career had once been. When she first read the lyrics, cynical, guarded, questioning whether love was even worth trusting, she rejected it too,
That it's only love.
calling it an anti-love song that didn't fit who she was as an artist. Her manager saw something in it she initially couldn't. He arranged a meeting between Turner and songwriter Terry Britten, who encouraged her to slow the song down and sing it almost like she was jogging, steady, controlled, driven forward by something deeper than anger. Something shifted. She recorded it. What's Love Got to Do With It became her first ever solo number 1, made her, at 44, the oldest female solo artist to top the charts at the time, and won 3 Grammy Awards including Record of the Year. Decades later, discussing her own documentary, Turner said hearing that song again was one of the most emotional moments of her life, a reminder of exactly how far she'd actually come. A song about guarding your heart against being broken again was rejected by singer after singer until it found the one woman on earth who had genuinely lived every word of it and turned survival into the greatest comeback in music history.